Hello and welcome to BYJU'S IAS. Let's take up the analysis of today's The Hindu newspaper. An article on the front page of the Delhi edition says that shortage of funds has hit the implementation of the MGNREGA scheme. More than 96% of the funds allocated to the MGNREGA scheme has already been spent for the financial year. And under the MGNREGA budget, less than 2,500 crore rupees has been left for the remaining 2 months. This map shows that nearly 15 states are in the deficit as far as the MGNREGA scheme is concerned because the central government is yet to clear their pending dues. This shortage of funds is bound to increase rural distress because during the months of January, February and March, agricultural activity is extremely low in the rural areas and farmers and people in the rural areas are desperately looking for employment. The article blames the low budgetary allocation for this current situation because compared to last year's budget, this year's budget for MGNREGA was reduced by 60,000 crore rupees. The budgetary allocation for MGNREGA has been reduced despite various economists suggesting that putting more money in the hands of the rural people is the key to revive demand in the economy. So in the context of this article, let us talk about the MGNREGA scheme and the challenges in its implementation in detail. See, in 2005, the Government of India came out with an ambitious scheme and it was enacted by the Parliament through the National Rural Employment Guarantee Act. This ambitious scheme was later renamed in 2010 after Mahatma Gandhi, and since then it is referred to as MGNREGA or also popularly known as MGNREGA. The main objective of this scheme is to guarantee livelihood security in rural areas. Because see, in the rural areas, a majority of the population is dependent on agriculture. But due to agrarian distress and due to severe challenges in Indian agriculture, the livelihood of the people in the rural areas is not guaranteed. Indian farmers mainly take up subsistence agriculture and they are not able to afford the high input cost. The small and fragmented landholdings is not allowing the Indian farmers to scale up their agricultural practices. And the dependency of farmers on rainfall and the lack of irrigation makes them vulnerable to droughts and other natural calamities. Even if they manage to produce a bumper crop, their livelihood is still not guaranteed because of volatility in the agricultural markets. So by keeping in mind these uncertainties in Indian agriculture, the MGNREGA scheme was launched to guarantee livelihood security in the rural areas by providing a minimum of 100 days of wage employment per year. Under this scheme, every adult in a rural household can volunteer to take up unskilled manual work that will be taken up by the Gram Panchayats. See, under MGNREGA, Gram Panchayats are the nodal points for the implementation of the scheme. The Gram Panchayats will take up such projects which will help in creating durable rural assets. This could include the construction and repair of roads, the construction of water tanks, construction of toilets, desilting of lakes, rejuvenation of wells, ponds and groundwater table, and conservation of forest cover, etc. Such projects which will help in creating durable rural assets are identified by the Gram Panchayats, and based on demand for employment, eligible beneficiaries are employed by the Gram Panchayats in order to take up the unskilled manual work that is required to complete these projects. In return for this work, the Gram Panchayats will pay the beneficiaries a minimum wage that has been determined under the MGNREGA scheme. So this livelihood guarantee scheme recognizes wage employment as a legal entitlement, and it is in accordance with Article 41 of the Indian Constitution, which mandates the state to recognize the right to work. So this ambitious socio-economic program is not only trying to reduce rural distress, but it is also trying to achieve a set of broader objectives. By trying to put more money in the hands of the rural people, it is trying to increase rural demand. this increase in rural demand can be beneficial for the overall economy as well. And by taking up such projects, which are for the common good of the entire village, it is trying to create durable rural assets. And it is also trying to promote social inclusion by giving priority to women and other weaker sections in employment. The scheme also encourages the Gram Panchayats to take up such projects which will help in environment conservation. And overall, the scheme is trying to strengthen grassroots governance in India by empowering the Panchayat Raj institutions. Now let us talk about the other key features of the scheme. See, MGNREGA is a demand-driven scheme. Since MGNREGA has recognized wage employment as a legal entitlement, the government is bound to hire the beneficiaries when they are demanding employment, and it cannot be the other way round. And within 15 days of receiving such a work application, the Gram Panchayat has been mandated to provide employment. And if it fails to do so, it has to provide for an unemployment allowance. The scheme also mandates that the wages for the work done has to be paid within 15 days of completion of work. If there is a delay in the payment of wages beyond this specified period, then again a compensation has to be paid by the Gram Panchayat. And in order to promote social inclusion, the scheme mandates that a minimum 1/3 of the workers who are hired by the Gram Panchayat should be women. The scheme also says that the wages that are paid should be according to the Minimum Wages Act of 1948. And in order to review the implementation of the scheme and in order to review its functioning, social audits have to be conducted by the Gram Sabha. Then, in order to plug leakages, tackle corruption, and eliminate fake beneficiaries, direct benefit transfer scheme has been extended to MGNREGA as well. So the wages under MGNREGA are getting directly transferred to the bank account or the post office accounts of the workers. This in a way promotes financial inclusion as well. Then, in order to keep track of key metrics such as eligible beneficiaries, allocation of job cards, work progress, completion of work, payment of wages, pending dues, etc., a real-time online management system has been created known as MIS or Management Information System. Over the last 15 years, the MGNREGA scheme has not only guaranteed livelihood security, but it has also reduced rural poverty and promoted financial inclusion of the poor. This scheme has played a key role in creating durable and sustainable assets in the rural areas, and it has helped reduce distressed migration or rural to urban migration. Rural to urban migration has been relatively brought down due to the increase in agricultural wages that has been brought about by the MGNREGA scheme. The scheme has also provided for social inclusion by empowering women and by uplifting the weaker sections such as SCs and STs. Overall, the MGNREGA scheme has had a huge impact on rural development in India, and in fact, it is said that India was able to tide over the 2008-2009 financial crisis due to the strong rural demand that had been created by the MGNREGA scheme. Now let us talk about the challenges in the implementation of the scheme. The biggest challenge has to be the insufficient budgetary allocation. Over the years, the nominal budgetary allocation has increased, but the actual budgetary allocation does not take into account the impact of inflation. And especially last year, there was a major cut in the budgetary allocation for MGNREGA, and this is responsible for creating a severe shortage of funds. Apart from this, the demand-driven scheme has been turned into a supply-driven scheme by the government. All the three tiers of the government, that is the center, the state and the Gram Panchayats, have failed to provide employment on demand, and instead they have hired workers at their convenience. And another drawback is that the wages provided under MGNREGA is extremely low. In a number of states, it is lower than the minimum wages. This stagnation of wage rate has mainly occurred due to the delinking of MGNREGA wage rates from the Minimum Wages Act of 1948. Then upon this, there is a significant delay in the payment of wages as well. This is mainly due to the defects in the direct benefit transfer scheme and as well as in the linking of Aadhaar to bank accounts. Studies have also shown that a number of Gram Panchayats have failed to pay the unemployment allowance and the compensation for delayed payment. The next major challenge is to tackle corruption and leakages in the system. Studies have shown that a number of job cards are fabricated. Basically, fake job cards are created by local officials who are working in collusion with local politicians in order to make payments to fictitious workers. So these leakages increases the fiscal burden of this program. Then upon this, it has been observed that most Gram Panchayats are not carrying out social audits as recommended. And state governments have failed to establish an effective grievance redressal mechanism through which the affected workers could raise their grievances and complaints. And studies have also shown that the grassroots institutions, that is the Panchayat Raj institutions, are not adequately involved in the implementation of the scheme. And the final drawback is that social audits have shown that the projects taken up by the Panchayat Raj institutions are of poor quality, and as a result, the rural assets which are created are also of a poor quality. And these audits have also shown that a number of projects have been left incomplete. Then in a related article on page number 10, the Rajasthan government has written to the Prime Minister asking the centre to release the MGNREGA funds in order to clear the dues that are pending since October 2019. Now let us take up an editorial from page number 8 which deals with the blacklisting of Pakistan at the FATF. See, FATF stands for Financial Action Task Force. It is an intergovernmental body which was set up in 1989 by the G7 countries. It functions under the OECD and it is headquartered at Paris. The main objective of the FATF is to combat money laundering and terrorist financing. As a part of this mandate, this 39-member body comes out with a set of recommendations that has to be implemented by all the member countries of the UN. So based on FATF recommendations, all the countries have to review and update their laws against money laundering and terrorist financing. If a country fails to do so, the FATF can take action against such countries by placing them on the grey list. Once a country is placed on the grey list, a set of targets are given by the FATF which have to be achieved by that country within a set deadline. Even after this, if a country fails to act against money laundering and terrorist financing, the country will face the risk of being blacklisted. Once a country is blacklisted by the FATF, it will have severe economic consequences on that country because the country would no longer be able to raise international finances. It won't be able to attract investments. It won't be able to borrow funding from global institutions such as World Bank and IMF. Currently, Pakistan is in the process of facing this action from FATF because of its failure to act against money laundering and terrorist financing. Recently in 2018, Pakistan was placed on the grey list of the FATF and India played a key role in this. Of late, India has been trying to use the FATF to impose an economic cost on Pakistan for sponsoring terrorism against the country. When Pakistan was facing the possibility of being grey-listed, India used its diplomatic influence with the members of the FATF to ensure that Pakistan was placed on the grey list. And after being placed on the grey list, the FATF has given a 27-point action plan to Pakistan which has to be implemented within a specified deadline. Currently, Pakistan's progress is being regularly tracked by the FATF, and if it fails to abide by these deadlines and these targets, it faces the possibility of being blacklisted by the FATF. So India has increased its diplomatic efforts and lobbying efforts in order to ensure that Pakistan gets blacklisted when the FATF meet takes place next month in Paris. But to India's shock and surprise, The Asia-Pacific Joint Group of the FATF, which recently met in China, has concluded that Pakistan has been making some progress in achieving the targets and the deadlines that were set by the FATF. At the Asia-Pacific Joint Group, which was hosted by China, the FATF has concluded that Pakistan has made progress on 14 points out of the 27 points that were specified as a part of the action plan. So the FATF has noted that Pakistan has made some progress over the last few months, but a final call on the blacklisting of Pakistan is yet to be taken, and this shall take place at the FATF meet, which will take place in February in Paris. So the editorial says that India should not feel let down by the recent observations that have been made at the Asia-Pacific Joint Group of the FATF. In fact, India's efforts over the last few years has managed to achieve some tangible results. See, Pakistan is not new to facing action from the FATF. Since the 26/11 attacks in Mumbai, Pakistan has been facing action for its failure to act against money laundering and terrorist financing. In fact, Pakistan was earlier grey-listed in 2012 before it was removed from the grey list in 2015. And due to India's efforts, Pakistan has again been grey-listed for the last 2 years. So this international pressure has pushed Pakistan to take some action at least against the terrorists and terror groups that it is harboring. For example, Pakistan has been forced to take some action against the Lashkar-e-Taiba by charge-sheeting its founder Hafiz Saeed. Due to this international pressure, India succeeded in designating Masood Azhar, the founder of Jaish-e-Mohammed, as a global terrorist under the 1267 Sanctions Committee of the UN Security Council. So India needs to consider that by exerting international pressure and economic pressure on Pakistan, it has managed to achieve some results at least. But before India steps up its diplomatic efforts to blacklist Pakistan at the upcoming Paris meet of the FATF, India needs to understand the geopolitics which is at work behind Pakistan's progress at the Asia-Pacific Joint Group. See, despite India's consistent efforts at isolating Pakistan, it is a well-known fact that Pakistan has a number of strong allies because of its geopolitical significance. For example, the United States sees Pakistan as a key ally with regard to the ongoing negotiations with Taliban. If the Afghan peace process has to be worked out, and if Afghanistan has to be stabilized, and if the United States has to withdraw its troops back home, then Pakistan is very crucial for the United States to help strike a deal with the Taliban. So despite India's insistence and efforts, the United States might be interested to help out Pakistan at the FATF because in return, Pakistan can help the US to strike a favorable deal with the Taliban. Then Pakistan has another major geopolitical ally in the form of China. China has always been an all-weather ally of Pakistan. China also holds a lot of diplomatic influence at the FATF, and this might have helped Pakistan to register some progress at the Asia-Pacific Joint Group, which was not only hosted by China, but China was also holding the president's chair. So the China-Pakistan alliance will continue to obstruct India's efforts, and India needs to understand this geopolitical dynamic if it has to find a way out of this. Then in the Islamic world, Pakistan has key allies in the form of Turkey and Malaysia, and India needs to keep this in mind. This is where India needs to keep in mind the impact of its domestic policies on its global image. India's recent policies on Jammu and Kashmir, the Citizenship Amendment Act, etc., have created a negative perception in the Islamic world. And without understanding and appreciating this geopolitical dynamic, India won't be able to swing these allies of Pakistan to its side. Now let's take up a column from page number 8, which evaluates the manner in which the judiciary has interpreted the Indian Constitution. According to the writer, the Indian judiciary has interpreted the Constitution in 4 different phases. This includes the textualist approach or the text-based approach, the structural approach, eclectic approach, and the purpose-driven approach. In the text-based approach, the Supreme Court was focused on the plain meaning of the words that have been used in the Constitution. During this phase, the Supreme Court was basically looking at the letter of the law and not the spirit of the law. This can be best illustrated by looking at the A.K. Gopalan versus State of Madras case of 1950. In this historic case, the Supreme Court was called upon to interpret the fundamental rights that are enshrined under Part 3 of the Constitution. In this case, A.K. Gopalan, who was the leader of the Communist Party of India, had challenged his detention by stating that preventive detention is violative of Article 19 and Article 21 and Article 22. He was arguing that preventive detention violates the right to freedom that is guaranteed under Article 19. It violates right to life guaranteed under Article 21, and it violates protection against arbitrary arrest and detention that is guaranteed under Article 22. But in this case, the Supreme Court said that preventive detention does not violate any of these fundamental rights because according to the Supreme Court, these rights were not related. The Supreme Court felt that these rights cannot be read together. It was during this phase that the Supreme Court was dealing with the powers of the Parliament to amend the Constitution. While determining to what extent the Parliament could amend the Constitution, the Supreme Court felt that there were no limits on the powers of the Parliament to amend the Constitution. This interpretation again highlights the text-based approach that was being followed by the Supreme Court, and it shows that the letter of the law was being followed and not its spirit. Then came the second phase, that is the structural approach to interpret the Constitution, and this phase began with the most important case in the history of independent India, that is the Keshwanand Bharati case. It was in this case that the Supreme Court started seeing the links that existed between different parts of the Constitution. It started appreciating the links that existed between different fundamental rights. So that's the reason why the Supreme Court came out with the concept of basic structure in the Keshwanand Bharati case, which basically limited the powers of the Parliament to amend the Constitution. Then in the Menka Gandhi case of 1978, the Supreme Court rejected the earlier text-based approach and it recognized that fundamental rights are cohesive in nature, that is, they are interlinked to each other. It is this interpretation in the structural phase which has helped the judiciary to give a wider interpretation to the fundamental rights. For example, right to life under Article 21 has been given a very wide definition. Article 21 no longer refers to physical existence. It has been interpreted and extended to include dignity, clean air, free legal aid, speedy trial, etc. It was during this phase that the Supreme Court emerged as a key driver of governance in the country. Then came the eclectic approach or the diversified approach, which led to the Supreme Court to lose its focus. This occurred because the strength of the higher judiciary was increased from 8 judges to 31 judges. On one hand, with the expansion of the higher judiciary, more and more benches were being constituted, and on the other hand, governance was being diversified due to rapid globalization and due to the rapid emergence of newer technologies. New and specialized areas of governance, such as environmental governance, market economy, etc., were emerging, and a combination of this led the Supreme Court to lose its focus. The constitution of multiple benches gave rise to different interpretations to the Constitution. During this phase, the manner in which one bench dealt with fundamental rights was not the same as the manner in which the other bench dealt with fundamental rights. So the writer refers to this loss of focus during the eclectic phase as an institutional failure on the part of the higher judiciary. But now the Supreme Court has evolved and we are currently in the process of making a transition towards the purpose-driven phase. The writer says that currently we are making a transition from the third to the fourth phase. In the fourth phase, the priority of the Supreme Court is to figure out the true purpose of our founding fathers in enacting our constitution. Currently, the Supreme Court is occupied in interpreting the true purpose of the ideals and the values that have been enshrined in the constitution. That's the reason why the Supreme Court has been delivering landmark judgments over the last couple of years. For example, recently the Supreme Court struck down Section 377 of the Indian Penal Code and it decriminalized homosexuality. In another landmark verdict, the Supreme Court decriminalized adultery. Recently, in a historic judgment, the Supreme Court included the office of the Chief Justice of India within the scope of the RTI. But the writer also says that since we are still in the transitional phase, there are some remnants of the eclectic approach or the diversified approach which can be seen even today. That's the reason why the writer feels that the Supreme Court has not been able to come out with an authoritative judgment on controversial issues such as NRC, electoral bonds, etc. Now let us take up a column from page number 9 which evaluates the strategic implications of hypersonic technology. See, major powers around the world are rushing to develop hypersonic weapon delivery systems in order to gain a strategic upper hand. See, a hypersonic delivery system is basically a ballistic missile or a cruise missile that can travel long distances at very high speeds. They can travel at speeds greater than Mach 5. And such hypersonic weapon delivery systems can fly at very low altitudes, they can carry nuclear warheads, they can carry out extremely precise maneuvers, and this makes hypersonic vehicles uninterceptable by the existing ballistic missile defense systems. This topic is in news because recently in December 2019, Russia became the first country in the world to test hypersonic technology. It launched a hypersonic vehicle known as Avangard. It was launched on top of a ballistic missile and it is basically a hypersonic glide vehicle that can deliver nuclear weapons. Russia has claimed that this hypersonic glide vehicle can travel at 20 times the speed of sound. The other two major powers, that is China and the United States, are also not far behind. And China has recently claimed that it has also developed a hypersonic glide vehicle that can be launched from its medium-range missile, that is the DF-17. The United States is also reportedly conducting advanced research and development in hypersonic technology, and it is about to enter the testing phase. See, Russia and China have gained a lead over the United States in the development of hypersonic technology because both Russia and China are concerned about the expansion of the ballistic missile defense shield of the United States. The US is actively pursuing a global campaign to expand its ballistic missile defense shield. And this shield basically threatens the intercontinental ballistic missiles of China and Russia, and this weakens the nuclear deterrence of both Russia and China. So in order to counter the ballistic missile defense shield of the US and gain a strategic upper hand over the US, both Russia and China are actively pursuing the development of hypersonic weapons. And the United States is trying to compete with them by having a hypersonic weapons program of its own. So the development and testing of hypersonic technology has significant implications for global geopolitics. Since hypersonic weapons travel at very high speeds, it is impossible to intercept them with the existing technology. And this fear easily gives rise to the possibility of miscalculation and misperception during moments of crisis. Since hypersonic weapons cannot be tracked and intercepted with existing ballistic missile defense systems, countries would like to presume the worst. Even if a conventional hypersonic weapon has been launched, they would like to presume that a nuclear hypersonic weapon has been launched. So this gives rise to the possibility of miscalculation and misperception during moments of crisis, and this significantly increases the risk of nuclear warfare. And this fear will drive these three countries to get into an arms race in order to develop technology that could counter and defeat hypersonic weapons. And this could also result in weaponization of outer space because these countries might end up placing radars and missile defense systems in outer space as well. So, considering these implications, it is very essential for these countries to work out an arms reduction treaty by keeping in mind the risk of miscalculation and misperception. And for countries like India, which are also looking to develop hypersonic weapons, it is very essential to come up with a balanced assessment of the pros and cons of this technology. Now let us take up the practice questions. Which of the following statements are correct? Mission Shakti refers to India's nuclear weapon tests at Pokhran in 1998. This statement is incorrect because Pokhran 2 tests were codenamed as Operation Shakti and not Mission Shakti. The second statement says Mission Shakti refers to India's anti-satellite weapon test that demonstrated its capability to target enemy satellites in a low Earth orbit. The second statement is correct. Mission Shakti was carried out in 2019 and it made India the fourth country after US, Russia and China to test and demonstrate anti-satellite weapons capability. The third statement says, during this mission, a modified version of Agni missile was used. This statement is also incorrect because in Mission Shakti, it was the modified version of Prithvi which was used. So both statements 1 and 3 are incorrect. The correct answer is option B, 2 only. This question has been asked because we have a related article on page number 1 which refers to the anti-satellite missile which was displayed during the Republic Day parade. Now let us take up the second practice question. Which of the following statements are correct? The European Parliament is one of the 7 primary institutions of the European Union. It shares its legislative powers with the Council of the European Union. Both the statements are correct. Option C is the right answer. This question has been asked because we have a related article on the first page. According to this article, the European Union Parliament is all set to vote on a resolution against the Citizenship Amendment Act and against India's policies in Jammu and Kashmir. So in this context, I would request you to take up a small exercise. Please read about the 7 primary institutions of the European Union and identify their functions. And you can post this in the comment section below. Now let us take up the third practice question. Which of the following statements are correct? The Central Adoption Resource Authority or CARA is a non-statutory body. It functions under the Ministry of Women and Child Development. It monitors and regulates in-country and inter-country adoptions and deals with inter-country adoptions in accordance with the provisions of the Hague Convention on Inter-Country Adoption of 1993. Amongst the given statements, the first statement is incorrect because CARA is a statutory body. The other 2 statements are correct, so option C is the right answer. This question has been asked because we have a related article on page number 1. This article highlights the plight of adopted children who are returned by their adopted families. So in order to help such children to deal with their traumatic experience and take care of their emotional and physical well-being, the government of India has launched a remedial plan. Now let us take up a map-based question. This country is located on the Mediterranean coast and has the largest oil reserves in Africa. This description refers to which country? The correct answer is option C, Libya. Please look at this map. This is where Libya is located. It is located on the Mediterranean coast, and amongst the African countries, it has the largest oil reserves. This question has been asked because on page number 12, we have an article that refers to the ongoing civil war in Libya. See, Libya has been in a state of civil war since the 2011 Arab Spring. Once Gaddafi's government was dismantled, a UN-recognized government has come up in Libya, and this government is backed by regional powers such as Turkey, Qatar, and Italy. But this UN recognized government has been facing a challenge by rival forces who are loyal to military commander Khalifa Haftar. Khalifa Haftar is trying to lead a rebellion and is trying to overthrow the UN recognized government. And according to strategic experts, these rival forces led by Khalifa Haftar are sponsored by regional rivals such as United Arab Emirates, Egypt, and as well as France and Russia. So this is basically a covert proxy war that involves regional and global players. And in order to prevent the escalation of the conflict, the United Nations had imposed an arms embargo on Libya. It means that the export of weapons to Libya had been prohibited by the UN. But despite this embargo, the regional and global powers have been pumping weapons to both the sides, and the United Nations has referred to this as a blatant violation of international law. Now let us take up a practice question from the 2019 prelims paper. With reference to land reforms in independent India, which one of the following statements is correct? The correct answer is option B. The major aim of land reforms was providing agricultural land to all the landless. Finally, let's take up a couple of mains practice questions. The first question: MGNREGA played a key role in reducing rural distress and in increasing rural demand. Evaluate the statement and highlight challenges in its implementation. The second question: India's efforts at blacklisting Pakistan on the FATF has been derailed by Pakistan's geopolitical allies. Comment. So kindly write an answer to these questions and post them in the comment section below. This concludes our discussion for the day. Thanks for watching.